hello and welcome to, now I'm going to say it, a special episode of the Fully Charged Show podcast. Now, I mean, no, really, this one is actually special. I'm joined by two very, very high-flying professionals, and we are going to discuss the reform or transform what is going to be happening in the future, really this year, all over the world. There's so many elections. There's so much stuff. We're talking about the politicization of the electric vehicle and of renewables. And I'm very, very relieved to be joined by Quentin Willson and Dan Caesar. Welcome, both of you. This is I'm looking forward to this because we've been busy this year, I think, with countering some of the negativity that's in the press. And it's been a lot of it. But Quentin, you really, I kind of think of you leading the team, the Stop Burning Stuff team, but you've done an incredible job. I mean, just merely from the fact that the Daily Mail had to apologize and say, we made this story up, it's worth it just for that one thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, Robert, we have to do this now. And we've assembled on Stop Burning Stuff this crack team of really, really good experts on batteries and electric motors and the EV market and climate and all that. So when we get things like that ridiculous story about potholes were being caused by EVs, we just analysed it and we found out that this research by the Asphalt Industry Association said that, big vehicles are causing potholes, but nowhere in that report did it mention EVs. And the journalist in the Mail had put in EVs and completely changed it. So we complained, and I have to give the ECIU credit for this, and Carbon Brief, and a couple of other organisations who just complained and said, actually, this is manifestly a falsehood, and the truth has been distorted. And the press association said, okay, yeah, you're absolutely right, and the Daily Mail had to print a retraction. Sweeney lost on page 37, but the point is, it was made, and I think, Robert, that the most vital thing from that is that the newspapers, who have been largely, very culpable in spreading these myths and this misinformation, because it's clickbait, because it's good for people going on the site, they know we're watching, and then they know we are a standard that will judge them. So it was a small victory, but I think it's really important.
Yeah. And I do actually feel that we've made a bit of not a dent, because I love the BBC very much, but I was quite vociferous in my criticism of their very it just felt a bit lazy more than anything else. It wasn't conspiratorial. It was these stories are popular, let's talk about how batteries wear out or that they all catch fire or something. And when you call them out on it, and this is on a few radio shows I've done, I've felt that there was a difference in approach, an editorial difference. They might, because I think it's right to be critical of any technology. There's no reason to be worshipful and go, we should be critical, everyone should be, and bring all the companies involved to account. But, there was a general feeling of just sort of sloppy negativity, particularly on radio and television, on the BBC, in their news coverage, nothing else.
But this is the great irony against which we're fighting, isn't it? That the journalists who are writing this stuff clearly have no experience of the technology or the product. They don't drive electric cars. They don't charge electric cars. They may have been in one. They may have spoken to someone who's maybe got one. But there's no actual before the mast, as my grandfather would say, experience of running, owning, driving and charging these cars over a period of hundreds of thousands of miles and years like we have. So whether we like it or not, Stop Burning Stuff, we're it. We're that breakwater against this incredible tide of misinformation and disinformation. And if we weren't there saying this stuff, because hold on, we know that Tesla batteries at 200,000 miles have a 10 to 12% degradation. It's factually there. You can find it out. We know that the incidence of electric car fires, you are 20 times more likely to have a fire in an electric car, in a combustion car, than you are in an EV. And that stuff is there, and they're just too, and the word is lazy, to find it out, because it's as close as Google. He'll tell you.
Well, as a father of young children, I'm fond of the odd dad joke, and I don't call them journalists, I call them generalists, because they have to be generalists. They cannot have a deep knowledge of any particular subject, and the same applies to politicians. There's an awful lot going on in this space, and every day it changes. And you and I, we're constantly online, constantly talking to people, updating our knowledge all the time. So a generalist can never keep up with that depth of knowledge. So we're very, very lucky in one way, very privileged to understand this area really, really well. There are other areas that I don't understand at all, but I would never profess to be an expert in that area. So for me, educating people at large is obviously very, very important. But the more you can do to educate politicians and journalists, the better, because clearly they have an outsized, disproportionate influence on people at large.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, it is. It is intriguing. There are two things that have dawned on me. I think you may have mentioned it, Dan, or someone told me. I'd not even thought about it. Was that the Fully Charged show is 14 years old, just gone, and I didn't even think of it, but the entirety of its existence has been under varying flavors of Conservative Party regime. And I mean, I think there were a lot of very positive things that have come out of that in terms of particularly in terms of electric vehicles and offshore wind. Even though Cameron said, let's cut the green crap, or whatever it was he said years ago, he did have a wind turbine on the roof of his posh house in Notting Hill. Do you remember? A tiny one, which would generate enough electricity to maybe run a small transistor radio.
Well, they did. I mean, I remember it very well. I was running renewables related stuff back then. Before we met, and the Cameron coalition government formed in May 2010. Fully Charged show pilot went out in June 2010, and for the first 2 years, certainly, because the coalition had the Lib Dems involved, you had people like Ed Davey, Lord Barker, even Nick Clegg. They understood the importance of renewables. So things like the feed-in tariff, renewable heat incentive, other things meant that there was actually quite a lot going on in the space, whether it was wind, whether it was solar. And then, yes, the wind started to change. Cameron famously said, let's get rid of the green crap. And it has been quite a struggle in the years that have followed. However, they weren't antipathetic towards these technologies, I wouldn't say. They were just a bit of a mixed bag, and they kept chopping and changing policy. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but even Boris Johnson was actually quite pro some of the technologies that we are pro. And then obviously that has changed in the last sort of 18 months or so. These topics have become genuine political footballs, not just here in the UK, but all across the world. And that's such a shame. Actually, the reality is that I'm all for. I really believe the way things are named becomes really, really important. And I do think the term net zero has become slightly difficult terminology. And actually, if I was a government, I'd be talking all about green growth. That's what I would be talking about. I think there is a huge, huge opportunity here. And with Stop Burning Stuff, obviously, we're trying to correct a lot of the misinformation out there. But it is a torrent, one of your favorite words, Robert, and we are seriously outgunned. So from a Stop Burning Stuff perspective, we've done okay. We've made a dent, I think, but we want to do more. And so we will be looking into taking on more sort of corporate sponsorship from organizations that share the same missions as we do.
Because Quentin, I mean, I'd love to ask you this, because the notion that a technology can be politicized is kind of bonkers. But I mean, in your experience of the automotive industry, I feel this is a new thing. It didn't. I mean, when there was people who liked Volkswagen and hated Jaguar, and people who liked Jaguar and hated BMW, there were all those little groups of. But there wasn't like an overarching, well, all those are rubbish and these are better, or anyone who drives this car is a fascist or a tree hugging. It's become this thing, which is odd, because it's just, they're still cars. I always argue that.
You're right. I mean, in the whatever 30 years I've been doing this and going to transport ministers and telling them to lower fuel duty and stuff like that, the only real thing we had was diesel and Gordon Brown and the 2000, what he called his green budget. But never have we seen this shift in technology like we have now. And you remember the days when we were trundling around in these little IMEVs and Zoes and Leafs, and people would just kind of metaphorically pat you on the head and say, "Oh, you're doing a bit for the environment." Now we are the Beelzebub of the roads, and you've had to leave Twitter. I'm getting so much ag now on it and vicious, hateful trolling that I'm thinking about going as well. And what's happened? Why have we gone from what was considered broadly a good thing to clean the air and get energy independence and get cleaner energy for all and not be dependent on fossil fuels to this threat to the old order? And I find it really, really difficult to see how that has changed and shifted so that it's all four parties now. I mean, they're all weaponizing the car and net zero and fuel and all this, whereas for years and years they didn't, and now suddenly we're startled in the headlights of people like Reform who are saying just scrap everything and carry on burning stuff and polluting, and allowing fossil fuel, licenses in the North Sea, scrapping the targets. Where's this come from?
Well, I mean, I personally think that what's been obvious to you and obvious to me for the longest time is there's going to be a huge transfer of wealth, as a result of the transformation to cleaner technologies, whether it's cleaner transport or cleaner energy. And I genuinely think that real acceptance and the penny didn't really drop with the kind of fossil fuel establishment until about 18 months ago. I genuinely think there were famously times when people said, well, Tesla are going to go bankrupt, and they never did, right? And obviously they've risen to be a hugely powerful force in the electric vehicle sector. But it seemed to me to be 18 months ago when people realized, no, this threat is real, and therefore it has become a fight to the bitter end. There's oftentimes I've heard Robert say, wait until they really fight dirty, wait until they really fight back. And I just think that's what we're seeing now. And I think we're going to see that for the foreseeable future. I think we're going to see, I'm sure we'll talk about America in this conversation, but even if, let's say, in the forthcoming election in the UK, maybe a government is voted in that's a little bit more pro-electric vehicle, that doesn't mean it's not going to, problems aren't going to arise in America. There's an election in Canada in October. The Dutch government has finally formed, and they're very much, going to be pulling away subsidies for electric vehicles. I can see that there might be some problems in Germany in the not too distant future around this. So has become a huge, huge issue as people have suddenly realised that actually this is going to be a real battle to the death for some companies.
But I think, Dan, it's more than just the transference of wealth, because EVs, green technology, sustainable stuff, that's an opportunity. The amount of jobs in fossil fuels was overtaken by green stuff in 2021. I think the problem here that I see is that this is being seen as a threat to freedoms as well. All those stories about 50-minute cities and not allowing people to have proper combustion cars so they could drive and have that liberty of the roads. It's that thing that it's the liberty of the individual which is at threat. The car for so many years embodied that freedom and those limitless horizons. So that's the way it's being weaponized. No, it's ridiculous, and we can all do 300 plus miles in our electric cars and drive to Scotland. I'm driving to Paris in a couple of days in one, and then onward to Bordeaux. There is this perception that this is a kind of elite, liberal conspiracy to take away ordinary people's freedom of mobility by using the electric car, and it's just crap, and it's been carefully crafted crap. And whether that's come from vested interests like OPEC, who can no longer control the oil price. We've seen them, they're turning the taps off regularly, but the oil price is still hovering around 70 to 80, $90 a barrel. There was a time when if they turned the taps off, it went up to $145 a barrel. They now know that they can no longer do that, and the writing is on the wall. So I think it's a combination of factors, but we're staring down the barrel of this real resistance to change. And the question is, what do we do? How do we mobilize the people who are listening to this to push back against it and the misinformation and disinformation?
Well, I've been going back to the etymology of words again. The word reform has seen a big upswing in the UK, which obviously is the idea of reforming something around things the way they were, right? And there's often a sense of we want our country back. I've seen that said in the UK and elsewhere. This kind of nostalgic view of how things once were, which kind of forgets all the bad things that ever happened and just remembers all the great things that happened. And it really is reform or transform. It's really which side of that do you want to be on? It is being weaponized. It is being politicized. The freedom piece is really, really interesting. And sadly, if we don't transform, we don't go with changes, then we are going to see our influence lessen. We are going to see our freedoms taken away in a different way. We will be poorer. We will actually find we will be less resilient to changes in the energy system. So it is like anything, if you get some charismatic grifters who want to tell you that this is all, change is all bad, that they can do that, and it will appeal to a certain mindset. We've got to keep just day after day showing people that actually EV drivers are happy, for example, which is something that Quentin's done really, really well recently at the Harrogate show.
Yeah. But actually, one of the things I was thinking about before we met up today was the kind of political turnover, as in elections every 4 or 5 years in democratic countries, and then the industrial kind of idea turnover. My idea. I'm not expressing it right. I'm going to try and get it better, but it's much slower. I mean, for instance, that's what, one of the things about which I don't know why, but I was really surprised when I heard all the big automotive manufacturers really upset about Prime Minister Rishi Sunak delaying the zero emission vehicle mandate, which was in 2030, and all their planning for the last sort of 5 or 10, probably 10 years had been around preparing for that, investing huge amounts of money in new manufacturing processes, in batteries, in new technology. And then suddenly a politician goes, oh, we're going to change it for very pretty shallow political reasons. And what's interesting is, although I see all these things as a threat in terms of the support for electric vehicles and everything, I actually think we've crossed some sort of Rubicon where they're just, I'm just waiting for them to be just cars. They're not special. They're not like, a new thing. They're just cars, and they're cheaper to run. They're better. They're cleaner. Those are all those advantages. But at the end of the day, they're just cars. And no matter what any politician does, there's enough people in the world who are going, well, can I just get one of the good cars? I think there's good cars and old cars. Doesn't really put a judgment on the old cars, but the good cars are better.
That moment will only come when we get price parity with new, and we've already got price parity with used, but when they start to be such a compelling proposition and the price of electricity goes down. So I think we're a bit away from that. But yes, it will just suddenly, perhaps explode is the wrong word, but it will suddenly just go into top gear, and people will start buying them. And we're seeing this in the second-hand market. But there are certain factors that need to change before that moment comes. But when you look at flat screen televisions, you look at AI, you look at ChatGPT, all these big changes, none of them have attracted the same sort of rancor and hatred and vitriol as the electric car. And I just think this is a moment in history that we just need to pause and think, wow, even the Liberal Democrats, for all their faults, are saying that we need to cut fuel duty for certain rural constituencies and things like that. And it's all being weaponized for a right-wing electorate. Now, the really difficult thing, and this is happening across Europe, isn't it? That we need to get people to understand that this is not a threat to their freedoms. It's a huge, huge opportunity for us to all make money and to create products and services that we can sell around the world to help everybody else decarbonize. And it's not about the fact that the UK only produces 1% of CO2. It's about doing stuff that is really, really desirable, saleable, and we can do what China has done and created this massive, massive ecosystem upon which they bet the farm, really, which brings us on to tariffs, doesn't it?
Yeah, but there's also the point about long-term patient investment. We had a dinner recently, an MP dinner. Quentin and I were both there. We spoke to some politicians of all different flavours. The conversation was actually fairly sensible, but there was a sense with the Conservatives in the room that they knew probably they weren't going to be the decision makers in the not too distant future. And what anyone who's looking to do to put investment into a country is looking for some certainty. So irrespective of what happens in the election in 10 days time or so, the reality is that the new government will probably have a 5-year shot, and they'll be able to actually tell people there's some certainty. Now, at the time we speak, that the Labour Party have held a sort of 20-point lead or thereabouts for a good sort of 18 months or so. So the likelihood is that the Labour Party will form the new government, and in their manifesto, actually, they reinstate the 2030 Zed Mandate. Now, actually, Quentin and I have discussed this, and we've got some slightly mixed feelings about that, because I think it could be red rag to a bull for some people, and I think there are other policy levers that could be more impactful. But isn't it incredible to think that at mid 2024, if they reinstate that, that means we move to that in just over 5 years' time. It was back when Sunak ripped the rug out from beneath the manufacturers in September last year. What would that have been? 2023 to 2035, 12 years, all of a sudden, going back now to about 5 years. So I think from our standpoint, I'd really like to see if Labour do that. I'd really like to see some better, more subtle, policy incentives. I mean, I think the reality is that we had a plug-in car grant that's gone, and I don't think we should be subsidising expensive Teslas, for example. But if there was a plug-in car grant for electric vehicles, maybe on used EVs or for cheaper EVs, maybe £20,000, £25,000, that I think would be a positive stimulus. Equally, in the US, they've got the Inflation Reduction Act, IRA, I think as Quentin calls it, IRA as I call it. I've realised maybe I shouldn't call it that. And that actually has, incentives in there basically to encourage manufacturers to actually build their cars in the US. Couldn't we do something like that by embracing it? Shouldn't we have more of these companies making cars here again? I know we do have some of that, but it's not our own industry, isn't it? So I think actually, I think the positives seriously outweigh the negatives. And the last 2 or 3 weeks, we've seen the Reform Party, helmed by the Reform private company helmed by Nigel Farage. They've released their manifesto. I think it's called, Contract with the People, something like that. And I think Quentin's a bit more au fait with it. It's pretty disastrous from a point of view of net zero and electric vehicles. What does it say, Quentin? You know it better than I do.
So it scrapped the Zed Mandate, take away the 2035, 2030 targets, allow all drilling in the North Sea, and also reduce fuel duty by 20p. So for all those kippery, choleric colonels who want to bring back the black and white minstrels and get capital punishment, public hangings back, this will appeal quite clearly. And I mean, it's a really calculated shot into the heart of renewables and electric cars. He's a great strategist, and he knows that this is a touch point for these people who just see electrification, progress, this sort of renewables, clean air, clean energy as a real threat to the old order, to their jobs, to their way of life, and to their kind of belief matrix. So this is the problem, and I like to think that they're not in a majority, and they won't get the seats in the House of Commons that they need, because it's just impossible. But it is just pushing that narrative that clean air and energy independence and renewables and electric cars are bad. And I mean, where does that come from? And how do we just tell these people they're not bad, they are the future, and this is what we need as a country to be doing? Otherwise, we will be left behind with our diesel cars. And
yeah. Well, also, I mean, it'll be quite hard to buy them because, if you think of all the European manufacturers, they're not going to be making them for that long. Even the kind of more high-end brands, they are all. I just think that's a really common drumbeat I've been hearing for the last 5 years, is people who 8 years ago said, we'll never make electric, fill-in model or brand name ever. And now they all are. All of them, absolutely all of them.
But where the Reform contract is very clever is that if you reduce the duty on petrol and diesel, then it means that people will be able to drive around much cheaper than they would in an electric car. Therefore, any kind of fiscal incentive to change behaviours is eliminated, and they will say, "Well, look, it's far too expensive to own an electric car because look at the cost of charging it." So it's very clever.
Yeah, no, it is. It is very.
It's very hard now to go and buy a BlackBerry phone, isn't it? And that's the reality. This movement is happening more slowly because of the expense of building these things, making them, the infrastructure, all the rest of it. It doesn't happen as quickly as a smartphone revolution. But at the same time, there will come a point soon where most of the manufacturers are offering broadly just EVs or plug-in hybrids. And the Zed mandate, of course, includes plug-in hybrids until 2035. So it's not actually a cliff edge. But as I've always said to you, and I can reinstate this line if the Zed mandate is reinstated, there will be people December the 31st at 11 p.m. buying, on that eve of the Zed Mandate kicking in, buying their last diesel car or their last petrol car just to stick it to the man. There will be people who do that.
Yeah,
But
of
I
course.
genuinely think the vast majority of people will, by dint of the fact that their neighbours now got one, their cousins got one, whatever, will just want to buy a better car, and what the best ones available will be electric, pure electric at that point. So it is unfortunate. I wish it would resolve itself more quickly, and we're going to have to keep working at this. And I know it's tiring at times, and we'll be as clever as we can about making sure we can do it. But the political uprising against EVs has been, it's been very, very difficult to watch. It's not over yet, and it could get a bit worse. But maybe in the UK we might be due for a slight reprieve in the near future. But then stop burning stuff, we'll have to focus on other countries as well.
Going back to your point about people buying diesels on the stroke of midnight before the sales cut off, they should be allowed to do that. I don't think we should be prescriptive and dictatorial about this. If people want to carry on driving combustion cars, then absolutely fine, and they will for the next 50 years. And I think one of the messages we need to get out that we have, and I include all of us here, have failed in, is to tell people that this isn't a cliff edge. This doesn't mean to say you can never drive a diesel or a petrol car again in your life. You could do it till you drop dead.
Well, I mean, the reality is, I mean, what are the car sales annually in the UK? There's certainly of sort of a million mark, something akin to that. There's about a car park of about 35 million cars. So even at the point you can only buy pure electric from 2035, it's going to take decades to actually get every single car electric. So I really hesitate to say this, gentlemen. I'm not young, but you're both slightly older than me. But you will see combustion engine cars rattling around for the rest of your life, and I'll probably see it for most of mine as well. That's the reality. This idea that one day it's just going to end, it's just going to be pure electric.
Surely that then is the antidote to all the misinformation that you tell people, that this isn't as apocalyptic as you have been told and that has been contrived by the media, that combustion cars are going to be here for the next 5 decades and longer, and you'll be able to drive them as much as you want. The only thing that's going to change is the price of fueling them and the availability of fuel. But that is one of the greatest misnomers of this whole debate, that you're going to be taken, the day where you can no longer drive a diesel or petrol car is coming. It's not.
Yeah, I've actually seen political messaging like that on Twitter, X recently, which said they're going to take our cars away.
Yeah.
You read that and you just want to weep at the kind of the hyperbole.
Yes.
But the reality is, I think personally, the political mood in a country can dictate so much. It can really have an impact on what the media do. It can have an impact on what people out and about do. But the reality is, we've seen it in Australia. There were disconsolate EV fans in Australia as recently as 2.5 years ago who said it's never going to happen here. There's no interest. And then the mood changed very significantly when there was a federal election just over 2 years ago. I think the danger here is that, and what I'm really worried about is what's going on across the channel in Europe as well. If we seem to be coming out to a degree of our spell of maybe right-wing politics, hopefully, they seem to be entering a different phase. And what worries me, and what fascinates me, in fact, are the new kind of proposed EU tariffs around Chinese EV.
Yeah, I was going to mention the tariffs. Yeah.
I mean, I really think that's really, really interesting to watch. And I think, again, Quentin can talk more about that, and you could talk about that, Robert, in terms of what the manufacturers think. But I really, really don't think the UK should become infected by that. We should not be looking to put tariffs on cars from Asia more generally, let alone China. But maybe you two can talk more articulately about that.
I mean, the 100% tariff by Biden in America is obviously, political, and America was all been shocked by that first, what they call the first Chinese wave, which was in 2010, where all those Chinese imports of consumer goods and clothes and things displaced 2 million American jobs. And they said that this will never happen again. So this is part of the reason why they blocked the import of Chinese cars, even though only about 2% of Chinese cars go to America. The Teslas are made in Fremont and Texas. But for Europe, it's a completely different story. 50% of the Teslas coming to Europe come from that Shanghai factory, don't they? And then you've got companies like BMW, Mini, Mercedes, Audi, who have factories in China making EVs that they then sell to Europe. So this is completely nuts that the EU is suddenly barricading itself away from Chinese imports, which is going to just cost much more money. Mercedes, BMW, Stellantis, they've all said, this is crazy. This is going to really make it very difficult for us. And we'll have double taxes because the combustion cars we sell to China will potentially have retaliatory tariffs. So you'll be paying to take them into China. Then you'll be paying to take the cars we make in our factories in China back to the EU. So it's crazy. And then this whole thing about the EU's Green Deal, how do you do that if you're going to keep hiking up the price of electric cars so consumers can't afford them? And then you're saying, well, it's going to help, but actually it'll raise inflationary pressures because these cars will be between, depending on the tariff, which can be between 17% and 38%. No, 48% because there's a 10% tariff now. The difference will be between €5,000 and €15,000 on a price. So that superordinate dream consumers have of the €15,000 small electric car, that will just go
out the window.
Tariffs.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the EU are doing because it's completely mad. And for me, it's an opportunity here to onshore these Chinese companies, to have battery factories in Europe and in the UK, as they're doing. BYD's doing one, Leap Motors doing one, Chery's doing one, and Poland and Hungary and Spain. We do that in the UK. We can't afford to build a battery factory, and Labour say, "Oh, we've got £1.5 billion to build battery factories." Hey, baby, they cost £5 billion a piece.
Yes.
So £1.5 billion is not going to even make a difference. You make the groundworks for that money. So we've got to think about getting Chinese car factories and Chinese battery factories here in the UK, create GDP and jobs and everything. So it's hugely important. We don't follow the EU tariffs.
I mean, I couldn't agree more with Quentin, so I won't. I'll just add one tiny thing. I think we should be, this might outrage some people, maybe not our audience so much as other people, but I think we should be making a beeline for BYD, for example.
Yeah.
A very, very serious conversation with them about bringing their manufacturing of their vehicles, manufacturing of batteries to the UK. And the reason I say that is because we all know that there is a battery factory, a gigafactory slated for Somerset, for example. And we all know that that's supposed to be bringing 4,000 direct jobs, and then there's also the indirect benefits that will bring to that economy. But that is part of JLR. Now, we all hope, I think, that the electric Range Rover comes out soon and JLR really, really start motoring, excuse the pun, with electric vehicles. But what we've seen with car companies so far, like a Ford, for example, who've been very pro-electric, is you cannot assume your base, your audience, is going to be the first audience that's wanting to go electric. I cannot safely say that JLR's existing customers are going to be the first group that are going to want to accept electric. So the battery factory in Somerset, while it's great news, it presupposes that they're going to have huge demand for electric Range Rovers and electric Jaguars. That's part of the mix. BYD will, I'm confident, be selling an awful lot of cars because they're going into a totally new, they've got a clean slate. They're going to a totally new group of consumers. So the more, and this, I mean, let's be honest, we could talk about China, and China, I'm aware, is controversial for some. It's not that controversial for me, to be honest, but it's controversial for some. But what about the Koreans? They're doing extraordinary
Incredible.
job. Hyundai and Kia, for example. Again, shouldn't we be going to them? Plus, there are plenty of other brands that might be Chinese. It might be the MGs of this world, might be the Polestars of this world. Volvo, for example, obviously a part of the GD group. Again, we should be outreaching to those organizations. There's a huge opportunity because don't you think the existing automotive manufacturing base in the UK, it's a lot about JLR, Nissan, Ford, I think Mini. There's not that many, and actually a lot of them are based around ICE cars as it stands and not EV. So what if that went away and we hadn't got an industrial strategy that had onshored the companies of the future? And so I agree totally with Quentin. I think that's what I would be looking to do if I was, senior member of the Labour government if they get in.
But that means you've got to have a strategy, an industrial strategy to do this. And we have been asleep at the wheel. We've been dithering and arguing and having this ridiculous culture war about whether these cars are good or bad, when actually we should have been saying, look, this is a huge opportunity for us as a country to use our already, we've still got great skills.
Amazing skills. Yeah.
And electric cars in this country. We've got some really, really, really great minds. Why haven't we capitalized on that and brought all this inward investment in instead of scaring the life out of it? Yeah. When Sunak with his 2035, instantly anybody wanting to drop a couple of billion quid here said, nah, that's not for me. Thank you very much.
We'll go to Spain or France or Germany.
Or Poland or Hungary.
And I wouldn't be me without saying, this applies way beyond electric cars. It applies to heat pumps. It applies to wind turbines. All these technologies of the future, both making them and actually installing them. And, to be fair to Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves's plan around Great British Energy, I've seen them at different conferences saying, I've been to Hull, I've been to Grimsby, I've been to Scotland, I've seen the factories. There's a very famous wind turbine just sort of south of Glasgow, wind turbine farm, I know. And I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but they went there and they said, where are the blades made? Where are the turbines made? And of course, none of them are made in the UK. Let's not do that again. There's a huge amount of electrification of heat opportunities, electric vehicles of all different shapes and sizes. Let's get ahead of that. It is a green growth opportunity. And this is where I think the UK does actually have some advantages with wind power as it is already in the UK. So it would be a huge, huge shame. A tragedy, I think, for many, in fact, if we don't grasp this opportunity now.
A massive missed opportunity. And we know that fossil fuel investment has been eclipsed by green energy investment, long ago. It is, it's a sunset industry, drilling and burning oil. And we need to just culturally, as a country, understand that and look at the massive job creation and GDP and inward investment and just general well-being we could create as a leader in this. We'll never overtake China, but it's really important to see this as a generational opportunity.
I mean, there are every time. Well, I will drive past it tomorrow, and we're going to film a car. When I drive past the Honda factory outside Swindon, which closed down a few years ago, that is a perfect facsimile of the old Toyota factory that Tesla bought in California. There's a massive, really well equipped, designed to build cars factory. It's huge. It was a huge plant, and you could. If I was in Parliament, I'd be going, that boss from BYD when he came over, can you get him in a car and drive him to Swindon and we'll show him round? Go, look, there's a factory. There's those opportunities. They do require, but you're absolutely right, Quentin. They require some longer term, clear thinking strategy, which we really haven't had for a long time. Can we go quickly on to the United States, just because I'm intrigued by to what we've been talking about is quite subtle. I think quite subtle differences between the existing the existing political makeup of this country and what might happen. It's not that massive a shift, but in the United States, the difference between the Biden administration and the Trump administration is monstrous. It is really, really, it's frightening to look at it from the outside, because I know we have a lot of American listeners and they're more used to it, but it is baffling as well as frightening. But if Trump does win, how big an effect will that have on electric vehicles? Because I think something happened bizarrely recently with Elon Musk met Trump on a couple of times, and apparently Trump has said less negative stuff about electric vehicles after that, but he did talk about electric boats. Sorry, it's serious. I shouldn't be laughing, but about what happens when your electric boat, they're bound to sink because the batteries are heavy and you've got a shark swimming around you and you're in a boat and it sinks. So do you go for being electrified by the battery when it goes underwater, or being eaten by the shark? And you just think this was in a public speech and people listen to it.
Well, there are a lot of reasons, you listen to what Trump says and you wonder, is he being advised at all? And is he being advised by people that have just been let out of an asylum? But look, he makes it up as he goes along.
Yeah.
America has different challenges to us, doesn't it, Robert? In
Yeah.
the sense that they don't really have a clean air problem because they don't have diesel as much as we do in passenger
That's true.
cars,
Yeah.
certainly the trucks. So it's not so pressing with all that particular stuff. Sure, they've got pollution in big cities. They also don't have an energy independence problem because they're energy independent with all that shale stuff, and they're outproducing Saudi Arabia. So really the imperative to own an electric car over there is different to what it is here. And I think that's what Trump is capitalizing on, that in America, it's much more politicized. You are a Democrat if you drive an electric car. It's as simple as that. You're a tree hugger. You're a liberal. You're all the things that the Republicans hate. And then the Republicans are being, hosed with money from the fossil fuel industry. I mean, the Conservatives since 2019 in the UK had about £8 or £9 million donated by fossil fuel interested companies. Whereas in America, I mean, that's tiny. That they'll make 30 million in one fundraising dinner. So can you imagine the money that is flowing from ExxonMobil and all these companies into those Republican coffers? So I think it's a very, very different landscape.
Yeah. Well, it's also, if you have a politician who's quite happy to say quite openly, give me $1 billion for my campaign and I'll let you drill anywhere you want. That's fairly obvious.
And it makes us give thanks for the political system we have in the UK, doesn't it?
I mean, again, it's just the possibility of it really polluting a discourse, globally, because, well, particularly, I actually think in China and Korea, they don't actually look.
They're not bothered
at America at all. But for us, where we sit, we seem to be downwind of America. We seem to catch a lot of it here in the UK and in the US as well. And let's not pretend like Biden's, vibrant, forward-thinking candidate, but the reality is I find the Trump-Musk sort of bromance absolutely fascinating. You can't imagine how they can get on forever because there are some areas in which their objectives align, and there are others which they are totally opposed. Like, I think Trump will go in heavily on electric vehicles and wind turbines. I don't think he will be able to help himself.
You won't be able to resist
will be a key part of his speeches over the next few months. But at the same time, obviously, there was even talk about Elon Musk being a special advisor to Trump at one point. But clearly, it's a very different landscape, as Quentin says, and obviously they've also got Ford and General Motors there. They've got two what have been very, very powerful automotive conglomerates there, and they've got to factor them into the whole thing as well. And meanwhile, the thing they don't talk about very often in the US is Tesla has been an extraordinary success story. So it's a really, really difficult. But I think the reality is it's going to get quite nasty. I think with political campaigning out there over the next few months, I think EVs will get dragged into that. For sure.
I mean, 1.2 million Americans bought an electric car last year, which is way above what I somehow had assumed. I mean, it is apparently 7.6% of new car sales in America, but I mean, it's still a chunky number of people. And I mean, didn't we have contact with Republicans for EVs or something in the States? What was that? I can't remember who they were, but
a fringe group who were incredibly articulate and knowledgeable and intelligent, and they were saying that Republicans want EVs because we see the possibilities and see how dominant and successful Tesla is, and we don't all hate them, and we had several conversations, didn't we, with them, Dan? And I think that's good. I think that they're pretty small, and compared to us, not quite so vocal.
Yeah, there's a fantastic guy who leads that. Their CEO is a guy called Mike Murphy. I think we're going to try and get him on the podcast at some point. And they've did some amazing research, which I think will leave him to go through, of attitudes towards electric vehicles, because it doesn't actually cut that evenly down the divide. There's plenty of Republicans out there who do actually quite like the ideas, and you can get some great merchandise for Republicans for EVs, Republicans for EVs hats, and all the rest of it. So make America green again. I'm sure that's probably one of their hats.
Yeah,
as well. Yeah. So we'll get them on the podcast. But no, stop burning stuff. Obviously, UK, we're domiciled in the UK in what terms of what we do. It's a real focal area. It will continue to be so, of course. But I think it is. We can't it can't be everywhere, but I think the US and Europe, what's going on in those countries is really interesting, and we will have to adapt. I do think that, like the Rowan Atkinson article that came out, what was that, 14, 15 months ago, and that went global, and I think a lot of the stuff we're talking about with Trump will go global. He is a megaphone, isn't he? He's I'll say dog whistle, but he's a bit louder than that.
Yeah, but when he makes such mistakes like the sharks of the batteries and calling them electrical cars and that they don't go very far, most people really understand now that he has no experience of them, and he's trotting out the stuff he reads on Facebook.
It's not quite good. Well, that quote, "We're going to end the mandate on electric one day," that is actually the quote that he said. And I checked and I listened to it, and that is exactly what he says. And it doesn't. What does that mean? We're gonna have to have candles and whale oil lamps, or doesn't it? Literally doesn't mean anything. But I bet it got a cheer when he said it.
But isn't it funny that electric is now a threat to the order? And that's how far we've misunderstood this. And if you've got politicians as influential as Trump actually saying that sort of stuff, then the whole thing is imperiled. And maybe this is the question we need to ask. Are we at an inflection point where the right wing across Europe and across America is going to imperil this transition? And what can we do to stop that?
There's a great film called The Current War, which chronicles the story of Edison versus Westinghouse with an influence from Tesla, and that was over 100 years ago.
Yeah, well over 100 years.
That played out, but the ramifications are continuing. The ubiquity, the fungibility of electricity was always going to give it the edge. But obviously, all these power structures have got regulatory capture, where oil and gas has got control of governments, it's got control of politicians, it's got control of journalists, and now we're seeing that kind of play out. I think the reality is for us, whether it's FlyCharge show communicating the benefits of these technologies, it's Everything Electric exhibitions taking the technologies around the world, it's Stop Burning stuff, setting straight some of the mistruths. We're going to be busy for the foreseeable future, because it's going to be a battle royale, isn't it, to get us away from burning stuff.
Yeah,
and we need your help. You're listening to this patiently. You've got to the end.
yes.
If there is anything you can do, help support us, help spread the word. FairCharge published the little book of EV myths, 41 myths, some ridiculous, some not so. And that's available on our website. It's a free download, faircharge.co.uk. And it's really useful just when you're in those conversations with the people who don't understand the sector at all, or EVs, you can just look it up, and there it is, carefully, actually double-checked.
That's a great book. Our team is going to be in Vancouver in September for Everything Electric Canada. And we're going to obviously be talking about a lot of things Canadian, but also we've got, Oregon, Portland, just over the way from Vancouver. I hope to see quite a few of our US fans at that show as well. Canada has elections as well coming up in October, by the way, which also probably look like they're going to move to the right of centre from October onwards. And then we're going to be at Farnborough for Everything Electric South, back there for the first time in 18 months. And it is our absolute mission to get some politicians and some journalists and other influential people into electric vehicles. We've just eclipsed 100,000 test drives across all of our events globally so far, and that's a big mission that we're continuing. So we will, rest assured, we'll keep working and fighting. But any help anyone can give us is obviously very much appreciated.
And if you come to Everything Electric South, we're doing a project called Voices of the Million, the million plus people who are driving electric cars. If you want to be interviewed for that and put on TikTok and Twitter and LinkedIn and all that, please come and we'll listen to what you say, because it's really, we did some at the last Everything Electric, and it's really heartening to hear people who've been driving electric cars for sometimes 8-9 years, and the only problem I ever had was a door handle. It's been completely and utterly reliable. And converted combustion cars, this is what we need to tell people. People without any agenda, people without any reason to dissemble, are telling you, actually, they've worked for me for the last decade. So, if you want to do that, come. We'd be delighted to interview you and spread the word.
I've got one very brief correction to make, Dan, from your statement about our show in Vancouver, because it was all 100% on the nose and perfect, except for that we'd love people from Portland and Oregon to come, but they'd have to come through the beautiful state of Washington and Seattle, which is much closer. Just wanted to point that out.
Yeah. No, excuse me. And
Don't want to upset the Seattleites.
We had a lot of people come up the Pacific Coast Highway from California as well. For that show, and a lot of people from all across Canada.
Yeah, I met a couple who'd driven in their Chevy Bolt from Austin, Texas. So quite a long drive.
It's fantastic to. Well, it's always really, really nice because you're not going insane when you talk to dozens, hundreds, thousands of other people who also love electric vehicles, love clean energy, and you realise that actually maybe the media haven't experienced it, and they just don't know, right?
Yeah. No, that's very good. I think we've covered quite a lot of ground. It'll be very intriguing to see what happens. Both, I'm really intrigued by both the British election and the French election. I think those are, and particularly because very recently been really inundated with PR stuff from Peugeot, from Citroën, from Renault, about who are making smaller, cheaper cars to directly compete against the Chinese. So they're doing a commercial response rather than a let's put tariffs on them. And so they are producing some. I've just seen the new Fiat Panda this morning, which looks really nice. The electric Fiat Panda, and the new Renault 5 looks really cool. It's quite interesting what those companies are responding by not making another SUV that weighs nearly 2 tons or 2.5 tons. They're making smaller, cheaper, lighter cars, which is, we need them. So but it's very intriguing to know what will happen if there is, say, a very strong Front National or whatever they're called now, the Marine Le Pen party in France. How that will pan out, but we'll see. That's it. We haven't quite gone over the hour. Yes, result.
We could have done as easily.
Yeah, it's very easy to do. Quentin and Dan, thank you very much for taking your time to record this. It's been interesting. I hope everyone listening has found it informative. We'll be back definitely with more episodes coming up very soon. We've got lots of interesting people we're talking to. If you haven't gone back, if this is the first time you've ever come across us, there's a huge backlog of I don't know if that's the right word, a library of fascinating podcasts.
Yeah, back catalogue.
Back catalogue. That you can that are all available on your podcast app or on YouTube. And please do subscribe. Please do tell your friends in particular, and tell your friends about all the projects we're working on. So Stop Burning Stuff, Quentin's amazing little book of EV myths, really worth having a look at that. When you hear more ridiculous arguments about electric cars, do you think, I wonder if that's right? It probably isn't. And the book would really help you. And that's all. As always, if you have been, thank you for watching and listening.